Spoštovani gledalci, danes v oddaji Evropa je doma prvič danes v tej izvedbi na kanalih Socialnih demokratov. Oddaja bo potekala v angleščini, prvič s tujimi gosti, vklapljamo se v Nemčijo, Italijo, na Dansko, čakamo še italijanskega kolego, vabimo, da postavite vmes tudi vprašanja, zdaj pa bom preklopila na angleščino. So dear all, it's my pleasure today to host good colleagues, friends. First of all, Martinom Schulzem, our former president of the European Parliament and also former leader of German socialists, now parliamentarian in German Bundestag. Thank you for being with us. Christel Schaldemose, it's colleague European parliamentarian from Denmark, also head of the delegation. And Brandom Benifeijem, we're still waiting for him, coming from Italy, one of the youngest European parliamentarians and also head of the Italian delegation. Now, just allow me to start our discussion saying that we face a human tragedy. Europe remains the epicenter of coronavirus pandemic. It is a human tragedy with unprecedented consequences. With around 52,000 deaths, our economies are paralyzed. Many people live in fear, and European leaders at the beginning failed to understand that not a single country can face this coronavirus alone. What is clear today, I believe, to all of us is that we need bold European solutions, that there is no time for egoism, for selfishness, for chaotic responses, but we really need European solidarity. And first of all, Italy is a best example, and Brando, thank you for being with us. I already announced you.
Yeah, sorry for the delay. Hi.
No problem. Italy is a best example. It was severely hit with this coronavirus, but today there is a growing sentiment that country feels abandoned. How is today in Italy? How Italians feel? What can you tell us, Brando?
Yes, first of all, thank you, Tanya, for this moment of exchange to esteemed colleagues. I've been working with both of them already in these 2 times. I've been an MEP. With this second time, I'm now in the second mandate. So hi, Martin and Christel. I think it's very important to consider what happened in Italy, as it was the first country to be hit in a very strong way. I want to give you a few data I've collected. There are 160,000 cases confirmed in Italy today, of which 61,000 are in Lombardy region, because that was the region where we can see also some errors by the regional government. This is being debated in terms of not operating a lockdown in the right time, especially in a situation where there were a lot of older people together, so especially in the retirement houses, where we are having a lot of casualties, unfortunately. We have seen 37,000 recovered people of the 160,000 cases, and the impact on the health system has been very, very hard. Obviously, there was, especially at the peak, much difficulty with the ventilators, with the intensive care. Now everything is more under control, but there was like a week where the problem was the amount of people that were under intensive care in hospital. That is the most problematic element of this pandemic, because of the high number of people that need significant treatment in hospitals, and not just older people, also even younger ones. So this was the highest challenge in terms of health management. Now we are more in a descending phase, and so it's more manageable, luckily. From the economic and social impact part, we see that the International Monetary Fund is considering 9.2% of decrease of GDP for Italy in this year. Only Greece would be hit harder. But I want to underline that all the member states of the Union, from this data of the International Monetary Fund, will be hit hard, from 5 in the best cases to 9 or 10 minus of the GDP. And I want to underline that when there will be a recovery, because in 2021 there is the prediction of a recovery, of a bounce. The risk is that those who have lost less, that who are more resilient, will get also inside the member states, and among them will get the best out of this bouncing back, of this recovery that can come the next year. So we risk that the damage socially that we will see inside our member states, when there will be recovery, that these gaps will be widened, that those who are ready to recover will recover in terms of economic capacity, and the others will go even further down. So this is an issue not just between member states, but also inside the member states, between different regions and between different social groups. Goldman Sachs has foreseen in its study of a few days ago that in Italy the unemployment could reach 17% and 23% in Spain, just to compare, and 11% in the Eurozone in general, which is a huge number considering as an average for the Eurozone more than 10%. The economic measures taken by the government, I will not go into the ones by the EU. Exactly. On the EU, I will not say anything. I just mentioned to conclude the ones of the government. We have taken, I think, especially apart from suspensions of payments from the April and May months. For the fiscal payments to the state for the people. There are direct support for autonomous workers that are especially fragile because they don't have any direct support being in employment, but they are autonomous. So they will get now 600 euros and they are getting another 800 for April. It's a kind of support for the most fragile, precarious, autonomous workers. And there is, I want to underline this as a final point, it's very important that we suspended the norms on state aid, because the government was able now to propose, and it was authorized by the Commission yesterday, 400 billion loans guaranteed by the government, by the state. So now the businesses can get 2 different lines, one for bigger business and another one for the SMEs. They can get guaranteed loans by the state. This is very important, I think, because we need to give also trust to the business sector that they can restart and that they can be sustained in a way for recovery.
Thank you, Brando. I will go to Martin now, because it seems that Germany was able to prepare better, because it was not for sure the first country that was hit by pandemic, but also I read just today, I think that you tested more than 1,300,000 people. So it was a massive test program ongoing. You have good stocks of supplies with medical equipment. And quite a lot of solidarity, not so repressive measures that we maybe face in Slovenia. And the government is today also discussing how to move on. And only, if I am correct, you have around 3,000 deaths. So Martin, how do you see Germany is reacting, and what is the sentiment among the citizens?
I think Germany has the advantage that we protected during the last 25 years our health system, our healthcare system, against that wave of privatization and reducing the whole system on a benefit project, to a project of earning money. We had that tendency all over in the world, all over in Europe, in Germany as well, but because of our federal system and the responsibilities of the regions for healthcare protection of their citizens, that strategy to privatize everything was in Germany not so successful than in other countries. And we should be honest, countries like Italy or Greece or Spain were hit much more by the financial crisis at the end of the last decade than Germany. And therefore, this is for me one of the reasons why Germany should be in maximum way acting in solidarity with such countries like Italy or Spain or Greece or other countries, much more effective. But for me, despite the fact that we in Germany have less death cases than in other countries, that the wave of infection in Germany is not so strong than in other countries, that our healthcare system is strong and resilient, there is another conclusion for me extremely important. In my lifetime, I think in our round here, I'm the oldest one. I can't remember that there was such a challenge. Never. This is the biggest challenge for public systems, for state systems, for the political systems since the end of the Second World War. Even after the fall of the Iron Curtain, we had not such a challenge. And therefore, nobody was prepared. Nobody knows how. There's no master plan to solve all the problems. And that leads me to another conclusion. If we know that nobody has a single plan, no single country can solve the problem alone, we need more than ever a European coordination. And therefore, I think to get out of the crisis, when the pandemic, one, is under control, what we then need is, and therefore the figures Brando just mentioned are so important, what we need then is a common European project with an investment strategy leading to two effects. The strongest ones should help those who are more vulnerable between the countries, and within the countries, strong regions should support weaker regions. And the last conclusion for me, if I look to the sovereign debt of the United States of America, I did it yesterday with my team in a video conference to check how is the financial situation of the European Union if I take only the Eurozone, or let's take the 27 as a whole. We have the criteria of the Maastricht Growth and Stability Pact. 60% long-term sovereign debt, 3% for the annual budget. If I look to the United States of America with their sovereign debt, around 100% of their GDP would be a country in the European Union under control of the Commission. But nobody would come on the idea to think in the United States that the sovereign debt, looking to the challenge they have for the time being, the same challenge we have, with no master plan. Nobody should now discuss about budgetary discipline. What we have to do is, yes, to accept there will be an increased sovereign debt, but with this increased sovereign debt, with this increased debt of member states of the European Union, we have to accept it because we need an investment strategy to overcome the unemployment rate of, in an average, 11% in the Eurozone. To overcome this gap between regions. Therefore, I'm absolutely in favor of a common European investment and recovery strategy, not a national one. That must be a European one. And I hope, and that's my promise to the friends all over in Europe, what I can do in Germany during the German presidency, that the German federal government, as the incoming presidency from the 1st of July, should lead the European Union in that direction, a budget of solidarity with an investment strategy, a kind of Marshall Plan for the European Union, that I can promise you, therefore I will fight.
Thank you, Martin. You mentioned these key points on European solidarity and strong, bold European investments. You didn't mention Eurobonds directly, but I understood the direction. I will come back to you on that, especially with you, Martin, and Brando, but just will...
Tanja, I can...
Yes, please.
One sentence. I gave last week an interview to an Italian newspaper, to La Repubblica, where I repeated what I said during the last 12 years. I was one of the first, together, by the way, with Poul Nyrup Rasmussen, the then president of the European Social Democratic Party, and I was the leader of the group. We made a joint proposal in that time for Eurobonds. I was always in Eurobonds. I know that this is in Germany extremely unpopular, but this is not my style, as you know. I have my conviction, and I'm absolutely in favor of common European bonds.
And I know that because we dealt with that, as you said, many years in the past, and nowadays we also, Socialists and Democrats, managed to put tomorrow strong wording in the resolution to have establishment of so-called European or Corona bonds, which I think it's quite important. But I will come to Christel now. I was today a little bit disappointed when I saw the roadmap of the Commission, and this is where I see the lack of strong leadership also from the side of the institutions, clear roadmap, how to exit, how to go out, how to continue life after pandemic. Now, Christel, you started, I understand, in Denmark today, opening already, you released some measures. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more how it's in Denmark?
Yes, and I will do that, Tanja. But first of all, I would thank you for making it possible for us to discuss the situation in Europe and in the different member states. I think it's good that we learn from each other and also try to find common solutions. So I'm really grateful for the chance of being here today. Yes, the situation in Denmark is very different from Italy, but I can tell you that, in fact, Denmark was one of the earliest countries trying to lock down, not completely. We have been allowed to go out to shop and work if it's needed. But I mean, very early in the process, we locked down the society. And it was, in fact, on the basis of recommendations from the health minister of Italy, because the European health ministers had a meeting, and he recommended clearly that something had to be done and we needed to react. So therefore, the Danish government decided very early to do a lot of things. First of all the people in the public sector were allowed to work from home if possible, unless they had very important health jobs. And those in the private sector who could work from home should try to work from home. Shops in centers were closed, but shops on the street normally were open still. The schools were closed down, so both kindergartens and schools and universities, etc. And very, very early on, we tried to keep the social distancing, as we all have learned from now. And every day we are told to wash our hands and things like that. It was from a recommendation from Italy, and we also saw the figures there. And that's why, because we acted so early, that we can see today, we are 5.7 million citizens in Denmark. We are not doing as good as Germany, but very close to. We have only 309 deaths. We have, of course, a lot of infected people, but only 309 deaths. So if we compare that numbers to other countries of similar size, we are doing rather well. And yesterday, the society started opening up again a bit, slowly controlled, but opening up. So now the youngest school children are back in school. They're trying to still keep a distance, so they have to sit with 2 meters in between them. So they're done. They're trying to do a lot of things in order to protect people from being infected. But a lot of things are doing well, and we are trying to opening up slowly, because it's important for the economy and because we can see that we have the virus in Denmark under control. You know, the curve didn't go the right way. So we are happy. I do believe that it is important to coordinate at European level. And therefore, I do think it is important that member states learn from each other what is good, what is bad. But I also believe that we have different cultures when it comes to how disciplined we are. I have been positively surprised by the Danes, because they are a kind of not so willing to listen to the authorities, because we know better ourselves. But in this crisis, they have been listening, and they have, in fact, almost really tried to convince other citizens to keep the social distancing and to listen, because people have been afraid. And especially because we have seen the numbers from Italy and from Spain that are so badly hurt, and therefore we really try to learn from that. So when it comes to the financial aspects, like Brando, then we also have some figures for the financial situation in Denmark, and there the authorities expect the Danish GDP to go down with between 3% and 6%. So it is a huge loss, and therefore it's also important to see what we can do to keep people in job. So therefore the government has tried to support companies that would keep the people at the job. Of course, tried to work from home, but still being in job. And if they did so and not fired people, then they would get some support. And that has been the case for a lot of sectors: the cultural sector, the private sector, bigger and small companies. So they have been, for the media as well, because they have been hit by this as well. So they have tried to do a lot of things in order to keep the country running. It has been quite costly, but we are in a sound financial situation. However, if I could comment also on the European solidarity, even though I know that you will get back to that later on, Tanja. The Eurobond, I'm not really sure that that's the best way to do it, but don't misunderstand me, because I think it is extremely important that we use the European budget and that we find a way to help countries that are suffering most. So in this situation, it is Italy and Spain, of course, but also other countries. We really need to do something first to help those most affected countries. And secondly, once we are on the other side of the crisis, of the health crisis, then we will face a financial crisis, unfortunately. And therefore, we have to make sure that the whole EU is helped. And I think that EU needs to do a lot of things here. And therefore, I was quite happy with the result from the Eurogroup. Plus, the other day, I think that all the plans they have made they are good, and we need to support them. And maybe it's only the first or second or third step. Maybe we need to do more, because we need to avoid a new situation like the one Martin talked about in the aftermath of the financial crisis in 2008 and the years after. We really need to learn from that time. Austerity is not the way. We need to help the society. And I'm a big fan of Keynes and the fact that in times of crisis, you need to send out a lot of money into the society. So we're doing well in Denmark, but it's because we learned from Italy. And I think it is important that we really try to help each other and make sure that we are keeping the hands, that we're helping people not being fired, and that we need to help throughout the whole of Europe.
Thank you, Christel. I'll go back to Martin, because I just these days read comparing the measures between Germany and Slovenia when it comes to self-employed or precarious workers, or those that are most hit. In Germany, for example, they are thanking to German government because they very quickly got financial aid on their accounts, and it's irreversible aid and quite substantial. How do you see how big is the financial injection the government is giving to somehow help to economic and social consequences of pandemic? Is it sufficient how Germany is reacting? And I know today government is also discussing the measures.
I listened very interested to what Christel told about the opening of schools and kindergarten. This is one of the most controversial items in Germany for the time being. Quite clear, Denmark is a smaller country. Problems are not so with numbers than in Germany. But in addition to it, we have a federal system. And in our country, the responsibility for schools is in the hand, not of the federal government, but of the government of the Länder. And what people fear in Germany is that that there is a different strategy from one land to the other land. So that Bavaria has another strategy than my Bundesland, North Rhine-Westphalia. Therefore, we are, as you mentioned, Tanja, listening and looking to the outcome of the meeting of the federal government, which is happening just in the very moment, together with the prime ministers of the Bundesländer. So that outcome will be on, which is concerning the schools, especially very for us. Because one of the arguments is you can control adults, but children playing on the playgrounds in the schools, you can't control it. Therefore, I'm very interested what the Danish arguments are. Perhaps you could answer a little bit later on it. And to answer to your question, 150 billion euros for the additional budget to the annual budget for 2020 were already decided in the last session in Berlin, last session of the parliament, around 150 billion. This is more or less 45% of our annual budget. We will give in addition now to support the small and medium-sized enterprises, to support our big worldwide acting players. We have a lot of them. And independent workers, pensioners, the healthcare system, people working there. But we must be honest, every Bundesland has an own budget and is adding to this 150 billion of the federal government own money. In my country, North Rhine-Westphalia, to compare it with Denmark, 17.5 million inhabitants. We give, I think, around 20 billion in addition. So if you sum up, we will be far over 250 billion euros we give in the economic system and in the social protection system as an injection on short term. It shows that Germany is a strong and a rich country. Mm-hmm. And I repeat, therefore, we have a duty because we are able to stabilize our own system. And let's be honest, German economy is a key for the recovery of the whole European Union because we are so strong. Mm-hmm. I hope that the German presidency in the European Union from the 1st of July on until the end of the year will be used by the federal government to mobilize the necessary means to do in Europe as a whole what we were able to do in Germany to stabilize the system. And perhaps one additional observation. Germany is depending from the single market in the European Union. Around 35% of our GDP comes from the export. We are an export champion, worldwide acting. But still, until today, around 67% of all German exports go to the internal market of the European Union. That means at the end, it is in the best interest of my own country that our neighbors in Europe recover as fast as possible. And to add to what Brando mentioned, Italy is a G7 country. If a G7, we had in the European Union 4 G7 countries: the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy. One G7 country left the European Union, which is, I think we all agree, very pity and a disaster in my eyes for the United Kingdom and for the European Union. What we have to avoid, this is an appeal I make as a German to my own government. I was one of the authors of the coalition agreement, which is the basis of the acting government in Germany. And I wrote, together with Angela Merkel, the chapter about European policy in that coalition agreement. And the title of that chapter is A New Wave, Fresh Wind for the European Union. If Italy will not recover in the shortest delay, if a G7 country, especially with the richdom of regions like Lombardia or the Piedmont or Toscana, if we will not help the Italians by European and bilateral investments to recover as soon as possible, we will never recover in the single market as a whole, because the Italian economy is enormously strong. France, Germany, Italy are the key countries to get recovery as soon as possible. And therefore, my appeal to all of us is, I share the view of Christel, we should learn from the best practice. We should in the future avoid to repeat mistakes we made in the past. And that means that the austerity policy we practiced after the financial crisis is the wrong way. What we need is a courageous investment strategy. And I repeat, especially in Italy and Spain.
I agree, knowing that especially when you mentioned rich countries versus poor countries and how important it is to understand and European solidarity, Italy is basically the Eurozone weakest or weak link that even before the current lockdown, Italy had one of the biggest financial crises, and again, it's very certain to face one. The question is how contagious will be. Brando, how, once again, abandoned Italy feels, and do you expect, you announced before 17% of unemployment rate, Spain will be only one a little bit above. What can we still do to keep this European solidarity? I listened to you lately that you are very critical.
Yeah, I think that the point is what Martin has said very clearly. It's an European interest, because not Che Guevara or I don't know, but the Union of the Industrialists of Germany has sent a letter to Angela Merkel saying it clearly that if the Italian businesses that build components that are essential for the industry in Germany are going to be closed forever and not just for this period of suspension, the German industry will be failing. And it was, again, not a crazy leftist or, I don't know, a revolutionary, but it was the industrialist of Germany writing this letter. I've seen it in a German newspaper. So it's clear that we are very connected. And Italy, obviously, yes, it has financial issues, but it's also the country with with a strong industrial base. It has an internal capability of, it has the strong fundamentals. This is something that is why Italy just needs to be supported together with the other countries in an effort to restart investment. The problem of Italy has been not very much, in my opinion, we can say the stock of debt, which is high, but also other countries have it high. It's the sluggish growth. Italy has been not growing enough in the last period, but to be frank, all the Eurozone has been growing a little, too little. Look at the growth rate of the Eurozone in the last years. It was not satisfying anywhere, not just in Italy. Italy was the worst, but it was not good anywhere. And other countries, to be frank, that are much frailer than Italy in terms of the backbone of the economy, because they have little industry, they are based more on tourism, they have more structural employment than Italy. Other countries in the Eurozone risk to be even worse if we don't have this kind of common solidarity. That is not, again, about just helping each other with each own, as I said, strengths and weaknesses that each country has in itself. At the moment, I have to be frank, I don't think, for example, that the Italian banks have more problems inside than the banks of other big countries, if you look at how it is happening in the banking sector. And so every country will have its own strengths and weaknesses that can be considered. But some countries, like Italy and others, can have more difficulty in restarting after we overcome the moment of the emergency. But it's in the interest of all of us. It's not just about solidarity, which we share as Social Democrats, as socialists and progressives, but it's an interest that is more overall for the society. Martin was very clear, I think, on the need for looking at a broader dimension. The comparison with the US. The US are looking at bigger numbers and a bigger scale, and China is doing the same, obviously, because of its sheer dimension. And Europe, can it go on 27 quarreling for nights and nights long, and going on at the Euro groups and the European Council? We will be crushed by the rest of the world that is promoting a totally different model, politically and socially, from us, because the European social model is unique. We see it, or how we are dealing from the health part, but also our freedom, the freedom to criticize the governments, the freedom to have a free press, which is not guaranteed in the rest of the world. And so if we want to defend this unicity, this unique mix, we need to get our act together and be stronger together. And I think it's in our common interest, because I insist, the diminishment of the GDP will be high everywhere. Everyone will be suffering, and so everyone has the interest to build the instruments. We are discussing about that. Tomorrow we will vote the resolution. Tanya has talked about that clearly. To have stronger instruments together, bringing together our efforts to recover. And we need to learn from each other, like Christel very well said, because Europe is based also in learning the best practices, the best experiences, and this is really, really important. I've learned it a lot by being an MEP, that we can really learn from each other if we do it.
That's true, and you mentioned that it's guaranteed in Europe respect of fundamental rights. In a way, I would disagree on that, because we have some many European countries that are abusing the pandemic to further in shrinking or in putting in danger democracy, rule of law. We see what's happening in Hungary or in Poland, that the situation is really getting worse. And here maybe, Martin, just back to you, because you have this long-lasting European experience. Situation in Europe when it comes really to respect of human rights or media freedom or democracy, rule of law, looking maybe more to our part of Europe, is deteriorating, and European leaders are not, or institutions, strongly reacting or have no tools. How can we prevent that we don't have today extraordinary measures and the leaders are having unlimited powers, as Orban, for example?
I repeat what I did in the past often. My feeling is that we should address clearly the European Council of Heads of States and Governments. The European Parliament, the European Commission made a long list of resolutions, of protests, of measures, Article 7 measures against Hungary, against Poland. As long as no single member of the European Council, and I'm speaking about the prime ministers and the presidents, as long as they keep silent, nobody, I heard no single head of government except Macron at the beginning of his mandate, but he became also more prudent in the last years. No single president, no single member of the European Council, neither Chancellor Merkel, nor President Macron, no prime minister from our party or from another party raised that points in the council. And as long as the prime ministers, the heads of states and governments says, yeah, we are the representatives of sovereign countries, we should not interfere in the internal and domestic affairs of other countries, and delegate that interference to the European institutions, it is quite easy for people like Orban to consider this then as an inadmissible intervention coming from Brussels in the domestic affairs of Hungary or Poland. This is the wrong way. What I expect is that the governments in the European Union, sticking to the fundamental democratic rules, say, you, the government of Poland, you, the government of Hungary, you are not the same government than my government. you are not respecting the same rules. I have to respect that to defend. So in a nutshell, as long as the European Council will not raise that point, Orban feels encouraged to go ahead as did in the past. And perhaps one point, the European budget, looking to the problems we have now, one of the biggest net receiver in the European Union from the European budget is Poland, is Hungary. I think the European budget for the future should have different principles and different priorities, to use the budget to support those countries who respect on one side the rules and who are affected by the pandemic, as Italy or as Spain should be at the forefront of support from the European budget, instead of countries who are receiving enormous money and not respecting the fundamental rules of the European Union.
Right, Christel, please.
No, first of all, I had 3 comments, but I completely support Martin in what he said about Hungary. I was extremely surprised when I listened to the Commission's president, Ursula von der Leyen. She did not even dare mentioning Hungary when she made a very, very soft criticism. This is simply not good enough. I mean, every member state should comply with the rule of law. And if they are not, we should be clear and outspoken. And the states of the prime ministers of Europe, they are not doing their job good enough here either. I know it's sensitive, but it cannot be sensitive. I mean, they had to be courageous in saying that we will not accept something less than a democratic state in EU. We should be stronger, and I'm really happy that we are clear on that in our group. And then 2 small remarks more. First, on the internal market, I completely agree with Brando and Martin. The internal market is key for EU, and we are all affected. So if one country is doing badly, we are all affected because we export our goods. It's so important in many ways, and therefore we also need to help each other coming out of this crisis. However, and here I might have something, I'm not sure whether Brando would disagree, but I mean, I think that the richer countries should help the poorer countries. No doubt about that. The solidarity is important, especially when you're a social democrat. However, when you say that, you also need to be aware that if we have to have a common, have Eurobonds or something like that, helping each other, we should also have a right to comment on how the financial situation is in each member state. And there are a difference between North and South in Europe when it comes to how to tackling finances. And we need to be able to discuss this with each other. I'm not talking about the austerity policy of the last crisis, not at all. But I'm talking about we need to discuss with each other if we're going to help each other. And I hope we will that. Also how to tackle the financial situation, because we need to find a better way in doing this. And then the last comment, and Martin asked about that, and I would like
to say that, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to reply. We also in Denmark have had a discussion about the schools and the fact that we are opening up for the small children. There are several reasons for this, even though it is also debated here in Denmark. First, we have a system where we have very many women also working, being out on the labor market. So if the small kids are not in school or in kindergartens, somebody else then the mother has to take care of them, and then it's impossible to work. So in order to get the wheel spinning again financially, you also need to make sure that the kids are taken care of. Secondly, the health experts tells us that we should not be afraid of the kids, because first of all, they're not really, some of them are of course getting infected, but they're not really getting ill, and they are better able to cope with it if they're getting ill. And if they are then contagious towards their parents, the parents are very often younger people if they have small kids, and therefore they will not be affected in the same manner. So therefore they thought that it was a good idea to opening up for the schools for several reasons. However, also in Denmark it is politically debated, of course, and the opposition, the right wing, they want the kids to stay home, they want to open up the hairdressers and the small shops, etc. But I think that we're trying to find a balance here. But of course, it's debated, and afterwards, once we are beyond this crisis, and I hope that we can learn from each other. I hope that we can gather all the facts and get so much wiser for a future pandemic. I hope it will last many, many years before we are here again. But I mean, we really have to learn, and we really need to learn from the very different ways we have tackled this throughout Europe.
Now, maybe as we are approaching to the end, some concrete questions, if you can answer. What we have a debate in Slovenia, or what is the dividing debate in Slovenia, whether we have two repressive measures, whether we should give to much authorities or more authorities to police, to army, to protect our borders, to protect our citizens, whether we should introduce tracking applications on citizens' mobiles, and so on, give more authorities to, as I said before, to police and army. Do you have similar debates also when we were lacking the medical equipment such as masks? We see huge delays, strange handling, huge costs, how the government and state is dealing with it, and not all citizens have the necessary equipment. What are maybe similar dividing issues in your country? If I start with you, Brando.
Well,
or maybe different dividing issues.
Yeah. No, we had a big, a lot of discussions about this too, but it depends obviously on the various situations. In fact, because in Italy, the health competence is regional, so this has led to different reactions from the various territories, and so different problems also in terms of the delivery, and the government has tried to unify the response, but it came out clearly that this fact that the health competence is so fragmented in Italy between the regions it was not very efficient for such a fight. And in fact, that's why also I think it's important that we push for a stronger health union at European level. Maybe we will not be all agreeing on this, but I think that it is not sufficient that we just exchange the best practices on this, but we also have a stronger immediate reaction organization from the Commission side. It was a bit crazy, in my opinion, that at the beginning of March, the Commission had to convince the member states to sit down and see on the blockages of goods on the borders and on the prevention measures. In the end, every country was forced to do some kind of lockdown, but some countries were even saying Italy is doing crazy things. I mean, remember the French government criticizing and then taking the same measures 3 days after. And if we could be more coordinated, not with Italy, France, or Denmark or Germany moving completely on their own, and then the Commission after trying to put some guidelines, but the other way around with some flexibility, with some freedom, it would be much better. And I want to just mention one point I think was very important. Otherwise, I think it's important to clarify on this from my side what we heard earlier about the financial control, etc. I'm a very radical European federalist, so I have a very clear idea. What we need now is a response of solidarity that will not be Eurobonds, because the Eurobonds per se need a European treasury, a European fiscal policy, a European taxation. What we are saying, in fact, a way for each other to control, to be part of a common action. So I'm a realist on that. Otherwise, we are asking for mutualization of even of the future debt or the future risk, but in a way that is not controlled well by each of us. What I think we are trying to come to a final agreement, and the Parliament tomorrow will give its part, its position, is to have some kind of, you said, Tanya also earlier, Corona bond, recovery bond, I think will be the name in the Parliament resolution. So something that is limited, that is not guaranteed unlimitedly, that is focused on a plan that is maybe 3 years in time. So there is a limited time, a limited amount of guarantee, but is big enough to be the kind of Marshall Plan that Martin was saying. And I think we cannot ask but this is valid for each country. In fact, in each direction, that we have mutualization of our common risks totally unlimitedly without a European treasury, a European taxation, a European, that is a federal one to be added to the national ones, not to suppress. But this is a big debate that will continue, and not immediate. I'm just saying I hope that we can build that kind of Europe, but this is obviously my view. But now we are more looking at a smaller, I think, kind of response, which is anyway significant and important, and the one we need for this kind of situation.
Okay. Christel, you go.
No, but I think that the temporarily help, the one that Brando was talking about here, is not for me a problem, because it is a concrete crisis. Italy and Spain has not asked for this, could not prevent it, and of course we need to help. I'm not a federalist, so I don't really see that extra level, or maybe it will come, but without my country. But I mean, it's good to have a discussion, and I also think that we need to try to listen and understand the different points of views we have, because I think it is important to help each other. I think it is important also to realize that we are kind of in the same boat in Europe due to the internal market. And if Italy is having a bad economy, it is not good for Denmark either. However, that also goes the other way around in order to find best ways to tackle the financial crisis and the labor market and reforms. Even though when I say reforms, people might think about the austerity policy. I'm not talking about that, but I mean, sometimes you also have to change and adapt the society. I mean, the Nordic countries has been successful in our way of doing things. And therefore, we sometimes are a bit afraid that if we're doing too much at a federal level in EU, that we have to change the successful way we're doing things. So that might also be one of the reasons why we sometimes are a bit hesitant in order to jump directly into some federal aspects. But I think the discussion is important. And I also want to underline that I'm very much in favor of solidarity, and we need to help each other in this crisis, and we need to help the countries mostly affected first, and then we can do more later on. But because the health situation, the health crisis will become a financial crisis, and here nobody will be unaffected. So I think it is important that we help each other, and I'm sure that we will. And I also think that the majority of the content in the resolution we're going to vote for tomorrow in the European Parliament would also be a very good one that I have no difficulties in supporting.
So how far do we go? Could be another hours of discussion. Yeah. Martin, please, for you to wrap up. You saw a bit different views, but the general idea is that European solidarity is needed. Martin, are you still there with us? Yeah.
The situation in Germany, the debate in Germany is the same. I'm from time to time listening to the news and reading the newspapers and the internet comments. I'm really astonished that there are people who knew everything about the incoming pandemic and who had the solution. I must admit, I knew nothing about it. And I must admit, I didn't expect such a pandemic. Since 3 months ago, I even had never heard about Corona in my life. The only thing I heard about Corona was that it is a beer called Corona beer. So that I'm now reading articles about people who said, yeah, but the protection here and the prevention there and whatever had to be better. Okay, could be, but it's not helpful to solve any small problem now. And therefore, we are all confronted in our life with a pandemic of such kind. 3 conclusions for me are very important in my country, and I think in Europe or worldwide as a whole. Those people who during the last 25 years told us private is better than state are not the serious advisors. A strong and resilient state capacity to defend in such a crisis is very, very necessary and useful. those countries who are strong, have strong state institutions, public security systems, can protect their citizens. And therefore, no, privatization is not always better than responsibility of the public system. This is the first conclusion. Second conclusion, a European one. We have two countries, Italy and Spain, I must repeat it, who were strongly affected by the financial crisis. And cuts in their public budget led also to some deficits we have today in fighting against the crisis. Therefore, also here, the European conclusion should be, instead to debate about sovereign debt developments, we have to discuss how to increase investments and how to improve the protection system in these countries. And this is done, then let's get back to discuss how to develop the financial strength and the financial situation of these countries. First things first, and this is to improve the healthcare situation, to improve the infrastructure, and to improve the financial investment capacity. This is the precondition for recovery in the Eurozone and in the European Union as a whole. And the last conclusion, this is a point worrying me most. Looking to some governments and to some parties led by people who try to have a political profit from the suffering of people, who are heating up the atmosphere, using in a cynical way that pandemic for their political strategy. Orban, for example, telling to his people that migrants brought the virus to Hungary, or this shameful president of the United States of America, who is obviously using this his function in that crisis for his election campaign. These are very, very dangerous people, and we have to defend our democracy. And therefore, this is my last observation, I have a full understanding for suspending the freedoms of the European Union for a certain time. If free movement must be limited to avoid that the virus is transferred from one country to another, I agree entirely. But once it is over, the freedom of movement of capital, services, goods, and persons must be guaranteed immediately after the end of that crisis, because this is the key element of our transnational democracy.
Thank you, Martin, for mentioning at the end how important it is that we immediately restore Schengen and freedom of movement. This is really something we have to do. And my 4 conclusions, it's clear we have to protect our citizens' health. It's very clear that we have to safeguard our economies and ensure social solidarity. And what we all agree, we have to make sure that we are better prepared for the next time. I would like to thank you for being with us this 1 hour and share your experiences, because as you all said, we best can learn from each other and support each other. And I wish you stay healthy and see you in other circumstances.
For me, it was a return to previous times. So I'm very happy today that we could discuss.
Would be good to have you back. Thank you, colleagues. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Good afternoon.